Hi everyone, welcome to today's wellness session. Today we're going to continue our conversation about grief and loss and focus on what parents can do to support their grieving children. Talking with your children about grief can be especially difficult if you're dealing with your own grief. Here are some important things to remember. Your children are concerned for you. They wonder how you're coping with the loss. They may worry about your health and worry that you may die. They may hesitate to bring up questions because they think that it may upset you. It is important for you to invite them to ask questions and talk about their feelings, even though you may also be upset. It's okay to show your feelings. In fact, it's helpful for children to see adults experiencing strong feelings because they actually learn how to cope with strong feelings like that from watching others or watching adults cope with them. It's important to use words like dead and died when speaking with children about death. Children need to understand these 4 facts that I'm going to share in order to fully begin the grieving process and to complete the grieving process. The first one is that death is irreversible. They really need to understand the permanence of death in order to begin the grieving process. They also need to understand that all life functions end completely at the time of death. Otherwise, they may worry that their loved one will get cold or hungry even after they've died. They also need to understand that eventually everything dies, or every living thing eventually dies. And last, they need to understand that there are physical reasons that people die. If they're not given an explanation of death or why somebody died or how they died, then that leaves them to coming up with explanations on their own, which could lead to them thinking that they did something wrong that caused the person to die, or they could have done something to prevent the death of the loved one. I think it's important to note that no child is too young to be affected by death. Research has found that even infants grieve the loss of a familiar loved one. They'll miss seeing that familiar face, or they can even sense the feelings of grief and loss that others around them are feeling as well. With older children, again, it's important to invite them to talk. I want to share some resources for parents. Um, One book is called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk by Faber and Maslish. This will help to develop some positive communication skills for when you are trying to talk to your child about death and loss. Another book that I like to give parents is When Children Grieve, for adults to help children deal with death, divorce, pet loss, moving, and other losses, by John James, Russell Freeman, and Dr. Leslie Landon Meadows. I'm going to read just a brief introduction about this book because, again, it's my favorite. Following deaths, divorces, or the confusion of major relocation, many adults tell their children, "Don't feel bad." In fact, say the authors of the highly praised The Grief Recovery Handbook, feeling bad or sad is precisely the appropriate emotion attached to sad events. Encouraging a child to bypass grief without completion can actually cause unseen long-term effects and damage. When children grieve, helps parents break through the misinformation that surrounds the topic of grief. It pinpoints the 6 major myths that hamper children in adapting to life's inevitable losses. Practical and compassionate, it guides parents in creating emotional safety and spells out specific actions to help children move forward successfully. So if you have a child that is grieving the loss of a close friend or family member, then I encourage you to check out this book for some additional strategies in helping support your child through the grieving process. I have two more books I want to share with you. Talking About Death, a dialogue between parent and child by Grolman. It's helpful for parents to read books that talk about how grief and loss affects children. And another book that also talks about how grief and loss affects children is Guiding Your Child Through Grief by Esmond Weiler and Esmond Wilder. It is also important for parents to have age appropriate positive interventions when they're helping their children through the grieving process. Some examples may include active listening, watching videos about grief and loss together, reading books about grief and loss together, and just continually expressing support and encouragement throughout the grieving process, and also offering positive affirmations along the way as well. Now I'm going to share some signs of prolonged or abnormal grief reactions. Sustained disinterest in normal daily activities, a decline in academic performance as a result of refusal to attend school and participate in academics altogether, difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite, extended regression, withdrawal from friends, family, and loved ones. If you notice any of these warning signs, I encourage you to discuss them with a counselor or therapist. If your child was already experiencing some of these warning signs prior to the loss, then these may not be indications of abnormal grief reactions. The next thing I want you to encourage you to do is invite children to participate in funeral arrangements or a memorial service. The first thing you want to do is provide your child with details of what's expected to happen or what the plans are, and then allow your child to decide if they would like to attend or participate. It may also be helpful to give your child some kind of role or duty during the service or while making the arrangements, like helping select what flowers or helping choose the flowers or pick the music, or handing out cards or programs during a service if they're interested in doing that. Or you may just want to also give them different options of what they could do during the service. Like they may not want to sit in during the service, but maybe there's a nursery close by that they could go play in, or an adjacent room, or maybe they could sit in the back of the room with a book or something like that. It may also be important, if you have smaller children, to make sure that there is an adult for each child during the service. Other things that you can do to help children through the grieving process is just to keep the memories alive by telling stories or just mentioning the loved one in everyday conversations. Parents also be prepared for grief triggers. Common grief triggers are anniversaries or other special events, holidays. So when you know a special date like that is coming up, talk to your child and talk about some things that you want to do together, or things that you can do on that day to honor the loved one that was lost. It may also be helpful to talk to your child's school, maybe even a school counselor at the school, to let them know what's going on, what you're noticing, how you feel your child is handling the grief process, and just get that conversation started to see if there's any supports your child needs at school as well. And you may also want to talk to your child's primary care physician, just whoever their normal health care provider is, and just let them know the same, that any signs or symptoms that you've been noticing, or just tell them what's going on, and maybe they can help you with things to watch for. As mentioned earlier, teachers and parents can help students by watching videos and reading books with them about grief and loss. I wanted to share I'm going to take a minute to share some of my favorites with you guys. As far as movies go, I love to share The Secret Garden and The Lion King when I'm working with students who have experienced grief and loss. So that's a good one. And then this is my favorite book to share with students and families. This is The Invisible String. All of these books that I'm going to share are great for grief and loss. This is actually a workbook that goes with The Invisible String. It has all kind of activities that you can do with your kids that go along with the book. And this is The Fall of Freddie the Leaf. It's another great book. This is another great book that children can work with their families with, or work with their parents on. It has different prompts throughout the book. It's actually a journal for grieving children and families. There's prompts all throughout the book, and it ends up just being a little grief journal once it's completed. So that's very therapeutic for students and their parents to work through together. This is Always and Forever. This one is Someone I Love Died. I Miss You, A First Look at Death. The Dead Bird. The Goodbye Book. R.V. Aardvark Finds Hope. When Dinosaurs Die, A Guide to Understanding Death. A Bunch of Balloons. And One Wave at a Time. This is a story about grief and healing. And these are my personal favorites. There's lots of books about grief, and nothing beats a children's book when it comes to helping children express thoughts and feelings related to grief and loss. Thank you for joining today's wellness session. I hope you'll use some of the strategies that I discussed, and you can find some additional resources in the description of this video. Stay tuned for our upcoming sessions, as we'll be talking about how peers can support their grieving friends. Thank you for joining today's session, and I hope you'll stay tuned for our upcoming sessions.